The old drum had long since lost its voice. Its goatskin head, once taut and resonant, now sagged like the belly of an old man, its ropes frayed and its base worn from decades of dancing in the dust. It sat under the sprawling shade of the neem tree at the back of Fatouma's family compound, ignored by everyone except her. The griot who once played it had died years ago, and no one had thought to replace him. But to Fatouma, the drum was not an empty relic. It was a trusted confidant, the silent keeper of her most precious secret. She had discovered the hiding place one sweltering afternoon when the air shimmered with heat. A loosened seam in the drum's side revealed a hollow pocket between the layers of wood. That was the day she had begun slipping folded papers inside, letters that held the words she dared not speak aloud. Letters for Idrissa. They had grown up together, chasing goats from the millet fields, sharing roasted groundnuts by the Niger River, and inventing childish games that only they understood. When Idrissa left for the city to work in a carpenter's workshop, Fatouma felt the emptiness like the space between drumbeats. Writing to him became her way of keeping the rhythm alive. Every few weeks, the lorry driver who traded between Gao and the nearby towns would carry her letters, hidden between sacks of flour. Idrissa's replies, written in his careful slanted handwriting on scraps of packaging paper, would return the same way. His words smelled faintly of sawdust and metal polish, describing life in the city, the clang of tools, the chatter of markets, and the satisfaction of shaping a doorframe until it was smooth under his palms. He always ended with the same sign, 2 dots side by side. Dum-dum. Their childhood code for, I hear you. The letters were her treasure, but the drum was their guardian. She would kneel before it in the fading light, resting her fingers on its cracked skin as if to whisper thanks. To anyone else it was just an old instrument gathering dust. To her, it was a beating heart she could still hear if she listened long enough. In the evenings, after helping her mother pound millet and fetch water, Fatouma would sit in her small room, lit by the warm flicker of an oil lamp. She would write about the way the moon spilled silver on the dunes, how the wind sometimes carried the scent of faraway rain, or how she had helped the midwife prepare herbs for a woman in labor. Sometimes she asked him questions she wasn't sure he could answer. Did the city make people forget their home? Did he still think of the games they used to play? Would the space between them ever close? When the ink dried, she would fold the paper carefully, press it to her lips and carry it to the neem tree. There, she'd slip it through the seam into the drum's hollow belly, knowing that in a day or two, it would begin its quiet journey to the city. She never told anyone, not her mother, not her closest friend. The drum knew, and that was enough. Market day in the village was always a tide that came and went with noise, color, and movement. Before dawn, women balanced baskets of millet, beans, and salt on their heads, children clung to their wrappers, and goats bleated from rope tethers. The air filled with the mingled scents of smoke, dried fish, and fresh-cut herbs. The Niger shimmered at the edge of the market, the water reflecting the sky's pale gold. Fatouma moved among the stalls with the calm precision of someone who had a destination hidden beneath her chores. She paused at the calabash seller's stall, then drifted toward the riverbank where the trading lorry always stopped. The driver, a wiry man named Boubacar with a perpetual squint from years on dusty roads, handed her a folded scrap with the ease of habit. No words were exchanged, only the small nod of conspirators. Back at the neem tree, she slid the letter out from the shelter of her wrapper. The handwriting leapt at her, every slant of the pencil strokes familiar. Idrissa wrote about the city's sounds, the clang of metal workers shaping hinges, the murmur of customers bargaining for chairs and tables, the sudden laughter of apprentices when a tool slipped and clanged on the floor. He told her about the sawdust that rose in sunlight like a fine yellow mist, about the pride in delivering a polished door to a family who paid him in both coins and blessings. I am saving little by little, he wrote. When the time comes, I want to stand before your father and speak without shame. At the bottom, as always, the 2 dots, dum dum. That night, Fatouma wrote back under the dim glow of her oil lamp. She told him about the midwife's work, about tending to a fevered child with neem leaves steeped in water until bitter. She wrote of the harmattan winds that had started to whisper through the village, leaving a fine powder over everything. She described the way the stars here seemed closer than in the city, as if one could pluck them down like calabashes hanging from a tree. The words flowed easily, but near the end, her pen hesitated. She wanted to tell him she missed him so much that the space beside her at meals felt like an open wound. Instead, she folded the page, pressed it flat, and carried it to the drum. Letters, she thought, were like water in the desert. You couldn't live on them alone, but they could keep you alive until the rains came. It began with the slow creak of the compound gate on a Tuesday afternoon, when the air was so hot it wavered above the sand like a mirage. Fatouma was in the courtyard, pounding millet in a wooden mortar, the rhythmic thump masking the sound of approaching footsteps until her mother, Idrissa, emerged from the house and adjusted her headscarf with a sudden urgency. 3 men entered, Oumar, the one in front, and 2 older men behind him who carried themselves with the authority of uncles. Oumar's boubou was clean and pressed, a deep sandy beige that seemed chosen to echo the desert. His leather sandals looked sturdy, meant for long journeys. When he lowered himself onto the mat, his eyes swept the courtyard once and then politely avoided hers. Tea was brought out, the brass pot singing gently over a small charcoal stove. Mohammed, her father, poured the first glass, bitter as tradition demanded, then the second, sweeter, and finally the third as conversation began to unfurl like a woven mat. The uncles spoke of Oumar's caravans, of the dates and cloth he traded, of his reputation as a man of steady character and strong means. Oumar himself spoke little, answering questions in short, respectful phrases. Fatouma kept her head bent over her work, though every word reached her. In her mind she compared his voice to Idrissa's. Oumar's was calm, deep, and measured, but without the familiar lift of shared memories. There was nothing in it that carried the echo of the neem tree or the drum's hollow belly. When they left, the air seemed heavier. Mohammed leaned back, stroking his short beard thoughtfully. "A serious man," he said to Idrissa. "The kind who can steady a family in hard years." Fatouma's stomach clenched at the word steady. Was that what marriage was meant to be, steady like a well's water level, unchanging, predictable? Or could it be something like the river, alive, shifting, and sometimes overflowing with joy? That evening, she went to the drum with a piece of paper in her trembling hands. The letter she wrote to Idrissa was harder than any before. She told him plainly, "A man came today. My father listened. They say his caravans are rich, his camels strong. I do not know what I will be asked to do." She pressed the words deep into the paper as if they might hold more weight that way. She folded it, slid it into the seam and rested her forehead against the drum's cracked skin. Above her, the neem tree swayed in a small breeze, whispering through its leaves. The drum did not answer, but she felt its silence thicken around her like a held breath. The drum had once been the life of every wedding. The old griot who played it had strong hands, and his rhythms could make even the shyest dancer lift their feet from the earth. Fatouma remembered him letting her sit beside it during ceremonies, showing her how sound traveled through the wood, how the goatskin could be tightened or loosened to change the voice. "This drum remembers every step," he had said. "It remembers even when we forget." Now it remembered her secrets. Dozens of folded pages lay inside it, like thin layers of her own heart stored away. On days when her courage faltered, she would take out an old letter from Idrissa and read it again. One of her favorites was written on the back of a wood order sheet. In it, he described the first door he had built entirely on his own, a wide, solid piece with a smooth frame. On the inner edge, hidden from view, he had carved her name. "So every morning when they open it, they open you too," he had written. But the memory of the drum was not hers alone to shape. That week, Fatouma overheard her father speaking with the village elders after evening prayers. The words floated in through the open window: dowry, alliance, security in drought years. The phrases were practical, weighty, and left no room for the shape of her longing. She knew that in her village, marriage was rarely just 2 people. It was 2 families, 2 sets of fortunes, 2 plans for survival. Still, she could not bring herself to see the drum as just a hiding place. It was a witness. The neem tree's branches framed the setting sun that evening as she slipped in another letter to Idrissa. She told him of her fear, of the quiet calculations she could hear in the adults' voices, of the way her life seemed suddenly small enough to be measured in camels and bags of rice. She ended the letter with their sign, "Dum, dum," and lingered there for a long time, her fingers pressed against the warm wood. It struck her then that the drum had been part of the village's memory before she was born and would remain long after she was gone. It had seen countless unions, some joyful, some merely dutiful. And yet, it had never been asked for its blessing. Perhaps it was time she did. He came without warning, his figure emerging in the shimmering midday heat as if conjured by longing itself. Fatouma was carrying water from the well when the donkey cart rattled past, and there he was, Idrissa, taller than she remembered, shoulders broader from work, a shadow of city dust clinging to his sandals. For a moment she forgot the weight on her head and nearly lost her balance. They did not touch. The space between them was the space demanded by custom, but their eyes met in a silent flurry of words neither dared to speak aloud. Idrissa carried a small cloth bag from which he brought out gifts, a bundle of fine sandpaper for her mother's calabash bowls, brass hinges for her father's door, and a string of glass beads the exact blue of the Niger in Harmattan light. The beads were for her, but he placed them in her mother's hands. They both knew why. Later, by the neem tree, she found a folded paper tucked under a small stone. His handwriting leapt up to meet her. I came because your letter said they had come. I will speak to your father and the elders as a man should. I have saved. I am known in my work. I will not shame you. She read the words twice, her heart pounding like the drum in the griot's hands. That night, she lay awake listening to the sounds of the village. The distant lowing of cattle, the occasional bark of a dog, the rustle of dry leaves. She imagined Idrissa speaking to her father, imagined the firmness in his voice, the honesty in his posture. Yet she also saw Oumar's steady gaze, heard the weight of his uncle's promises. Tradition was not a thing one could simply step around, it was a road worn deep by many feet. The drum, silent in the neem's shadow, would soon have to hold more than love letters. It would have to hold the truth of whatever came next. The meeting was arranged for a Saturday afternoon, the time when the heat had begun to soften and the courtyard shadows stretched like lazy cats. Idrissa came wearing a spotless white boubou, the kind that caught the sun in its folds, and with him came the cousin of his workshop master, a man of reputation in the city, with the kind of voice that could smooth rough ground. They were met by Mohammed, who greeted them with polite formality, his eyes searching Idrissa's face as if looking for proof of the man he had become. But Oumar had returned as well, his uncles in tow, their arrival a quiet storm of intention. They carried with them the dust of travel, the smell of camels and market roads and the solid weight of gifts. The men settled on mats in the shade, while the women remained inside, listening through walls of woven millet stalks and mud. The tea ceremony began, bitter first to test the truth, then sweeter to show friendship, and finally sweetest to seal the conversation. Idrissa spoke of his work, the doors and windows he had built, the savings he had put aside coin by coin, his plan to open a small shop near the carpenter's quarter. He spoke plainly without boasting, his voice steady. I have nothing to hide, he said. What I offer may not be as large as a caravan, but it is earned with my own hands. His words carried the warmth of belief. Oumar's uncle countered with quiet confidence. Our caravans bring goods from the desert and the river both. 5 camels as dowry, sacks of rice for the family, bolts of fine cloth for the women, and repairs for the village well before the next rainy season. The list was laid out like pieces on a board game, each one a move meant to secure the elders' favor. From the women's room, Fatouma sat with her mother, shelling peanuts into a calabash bowl, her hands working automatically while her ears strained for every word. She pictured Idrissa's eyes when he promised to stand before her father, and Oumar's polite nod the day they had met. Both men were strong in different ways and both seemed to carry futures in their hands. When the final glass of tea was poured, the tone of the conversation had shifted. The weight of Oumar's offering seemed to have tilted the scales, not out of malice but in the quiet logic of survival. Mohammed's voice, when he called for his daughter, carried the kind of tired authority that left little room for argument. We must think of the years ahead, he said. A caravan does not vanish in a single season of drought. That night, Fatouma went to the drum with no letter, only her hands pressed against its skin. The drum felt different, less a friend, more a witness to something slipping away. Above her, the neem leaves whispered with the night wind, and she wondered if even the trees knew how hard it was to keep love alive in the shadow of tradition. Fatouma saw Oumar again at the market 2 days later. He was buying dried meat from a vendor and noticed her before she could turn away. He approached with the same careful step she had seen before, the gait of a man who respected the ground he walked on. Your herbs cured my sister's fever, he said. She sends her thanks. They stood near the stalls where bright cloth fluttered like trapped birds in the wind. Oumar's eyes were calm, steady but not cold. Your father is wise, he said, but wisdom is heavy. It can press on a person until they forget what it feels like to choose. His words surprised her, not because they were rebellious, but because they carried a quiet understanding. Do you love the desert? She asked suddenly, unsure why the question had escaped her lips. He smiled slightly. I respect it. The desert teaches you to count your water twice and your blessings 3 times. He did not press for her feelings, nor did he try to paint himself as the answer to her heart's longing. That night, she wrote to Idrissa with an unusual bluntness. He is not unkind, she admitted, but my heart has already shared its meal with someone else. I do not know if that is enough to change what the elders have decided. The ink smudged where her hand trembled, and when she slid the paper into the drum, the hollow thud sounded almost like doubt. The following days brought no reply from Idrissa, and she wondered if silence could be a kind of answer. Yet in the stillness she found herself watching Oumar from a distance. How he handled his camels, how he bargained without raising his voice, how he greeted even the poorest boy at the well. Respect was not love, but perhaps it was a foundation. Still, her pulse quickened only when she thought of the boy under the neem tree who had become a man in the city. The harmattan winds began to blow stronger, carrying sand in fine sheets across the market stalls and into the houses. Fatouma pulled her scarf tight, knowing the season ahead would bring decisions she could not avoid. And somewhere between the two men who had claimed space in her story, she would have to find her own voice. The sky turned the color of copper that morning, a warning the elders recognized instantly. Sandstorm, someone muttered, and within minutes the entire village moved with urgent purpose. Mats rolled up, pots covered, animals herded into shelter. The wind began as a whisper, then rose into a roar that pushed against the walls, shook the neem branches and filled the air with a sting of dust. Fatouma ran toward the neem tree, her scarf whipping against her face. The drum lay exposed, the wind threatening to tip it over. She threw herself against it, wrapping her arms around the cracked wood as if embracing a child. Grit stung her eyes and she blinked through the blur to see another figure pushing against the gale, Idrissa. They crouched on opposite sides of the drum, holding it steady while the storm raged. Sand filled their mouths, but Idrissa shouted over the wind, "I will not leave this to chance. Give me one day. I will return with men your father trusts. We will speak again." She wanted to say yes, to pour her agreement into the air, but the storm swallowed her voice. She nodded, hoping he could see it through the grit. By the time the wind began to die, both of them were coated in a thin layer of ochre dust. Idrissa helped her to her feet, his hands warm despite the cold wind, and then he was gone, disappearing into the haze like a figure in a dream. When the village emerged to count its losses, there were broken pens, scattered grain and roof mats to be repaired. Fatouma carried the drum back under the neem tree and sat beside it until her breathing slowed. The sandstorm had left a strange calm in its wake, but she knew it was the stillness before a bigger change. She had 24 hours before Idrissa returned with his witnesses, and in that time, the weight of tradition and the pull of her heart would wrestle in the dark. The morning after the storm, the village seemed reborn under a pale, washed-out sun. People were sweeping sand from doorways, readying mats and checking the damage to their roofs. Fatouma carried a small basket of herbs toward the neem tree, intending to spend a quiet hour near the drum, perhaps to compose a letter in her mind before Idrissa's promised return. 2 boys had gotten there first. She heard their laughter before she saw them, the high-pitched mischief of children who had found something new to play with. They were banging sticks against the drum, delighting in the dull, storm-dampened thuds it produced. She quickened her steps, but too late. The smaller boy had found the seam. "What's in here?" he asked his friend, prying at the gap. A thin sheet of folded paper slipped out, then another and another. The boys froze, sensing the shift from play to trouble. One of them gave a low whistle, the kind meant to summon attention, and within minutes, a small crowd had gathered. "Love letters," someone whispered, the words cutting through the air like a thrown stone. Women leaned in to read snippets. Men frowned and shook their heads. The papers were gathered up, not by Fatouma, but by an older neighbor who marched them straight to Mohammed's hands. Fatouma stood rooted in place, her heart pounding in her throat, unable to speak. Her father's silence was worse than anger. He held the bundle as though it might stain him. "You have turned a drum into a hiding place for shame," he said finally, his voice flat. Fatouma tried to explain, but the words caught in her chest like dry millet husks. Her mother's eyes were glossy, her mouth tight. "Let this night pass," Isata murmured. "We will breathe again in the morning." That evening, alone in her room, Fatouma pressed her palms against her ears, but the sound of paper sliding against paper echoed in her mind. Each letter had been a piece of her heart, and now those pieces had been scattered in the open, trampled by eyes that would never understand the love they held. The drum sat empty beneath the neem tree, its hollow more accusing than secret now. At dawn, Mohammed carried the drum into the shed, away from the neem's protective shade. He did not destroy it, he simply removed it from her reach. When he spoke to Fatouma, his voice was rough with restraint. "You think you are the first to want something else," he said. "We all carry our small rebellions, but we do not let them become storms." He declared that the engagement with Oumar would proceed quickly, before further whispers could damage the family's standing. Oumar, when told, sent gifts, dates, fabric and a promise to repair the well's cap before the rains. The gesture was generous and it stung all the more for being so. Idrissa arrived mid-morning, his white bubu now dulled by travel dust, accompanied by the cousin from the workshop and the imam from his city neighborhood. They spoke respectfully to Mohammed, laying out Idrissa's savings, his steady work, his plan for a home. The imam vouched for his character. But Mohammed's answer was firm: there is already an agreement. When Idrissa found Fatouma later, near the shed, there was no anger in his face, only a quiet sorrow. If your father cannot be moved, I will not move you into disrespect, he said. But give me one thing, a truth you can live inside. Fatouma's throat tightened. I don't know how to make a truth that doesn't split someone, she replied. That night, she sat by the shed's door, listening for the drum's remembered heartbeat. It came faintly as if from far away, a rhythm she could barely hold on to. She wondered if mercy could be as sharp-edged as rejection. Later that week, Aissata called her into her room. She pulled back the sleeping mat and lifted a loose plank from the packed earth, revealing a small dented tin box. Inside were yellowed photographs, a string of worn prayer beads, and a folded piece of cloth embroidered with the name Mariam. At the bottom lay a letter, its edges fragile. My mother loved a musician, Aissata said, smoothing the fabric in her lap. But she married a merchant. He gave her stability, food when the wells failed, a roof that did not leak. She raised us well. Yet she sang the musician's songs when the house was quiet. Fatouma looked at her mother's face, searching for regret. Which would you choose? She asked. Aissata's gaze drifted toward the wall. The tent if it could one day become a house. The house if it could still hold music. The desert teaches us, anything too rigid breaks, anything too loose blows away. She put the box back, covered it, and smoothed the mat. Ask for time, she told her daughter. Not to run away but to listen. Time in the village was not a private thing. It belonged to the eyes and ears of everyone. At the well the next morning, Fatouma approached the elders. Grant me 40 days before any wedding, she said, her voice steady. I will spend them learning the midwife's craft more fully, serving the village and helping repair the well that Oumar has promised. Oumar surprised everyone by agreeing. A good wife is a well, he said. She should know water. His tone was kind, almost approving. Idrissa, standing at the edge of the gathered men, heard the number, 40, and understood it as both a door and a desert. The drums stayed in the shed, but in the evenings, Fatouma would slip inside, place her palm on the goatskin and listen. Sometimes she heard only her own breath. Other times, the faint echo of the griot's rhythm seemed to rise from the hollow, a beat that steadied her when doubts pressed too hard. During those 40 days, Idrissa sent no letters. He worked, saved, and gathered documents that might matter to the elders. Proof of income, testimonies from respected men in the city. Oumar watched from the periphery, sometimes at the well, sometimes at the market. He brought his widowed sister to buy herbs from Aissata and overpaid without making a show of it. Fatouma spent her days tending births, mixing herbs, and sitting with the sick. She taught Oumar's sister how to boil neem properly and once spent an afternoon stroking the hair of a girl racked by fever until the tremors eased. The work became its own rhythm, almost enough to keep her from counting down the days. One evening, Oumar came to her with a quiet offer. If your heart is elsewhere, I will not build with a stolen brick, he said. But I will not spoil your name. I will say it was I who paused. His humility lodged deep in her mind, an uncomfortable kind of grace. On the last day, Idrissa returned with his master, the imam, and 2 respected elders from the city. They brought papers showing his savings, a signed lease for a shop, and pledges of support. A man is not only what he promises, the master said, but what others say he has kept. Oumar was there too. Before anyone could speak, he stepped forward. I withdraw with respect, he said. Not because I cannot give, but because gifts should be chosen as well as offered. He looked at Mohammed. A well repaired is still a well, even if not mine. The courtyard fell silent. Mohammed's eyes softened, but his voice was deliberate. A husband steadies a family, he said, and perhaps steadiness is found in different ways. He turned to Idrissa. If you will stand as you have spoken, then we will speak further. The wedding was small but alive with music. Idrissa's fellow carpenters sent carved gifts, a low table, a chest for linens. The repaired drum was brought out for the first time in years, its goatskin tightened, its voice restored. The griot's apprentice played it, each beat ringing like a promise kept. Fatouma danced beneath the neem tree, the blue beads in her hair catching the afternoon light. When she looked at Idrissa across the crowd, she saw not just the boy she had written to, but the man who had stood in the wind with her, who had waited 40 days without knowing the outcome. The drum's voice carried over the village, and for once, it felt as if tradition and the heart had found the same rhythm. In its hollow there were no more letters, only the echo of all they had been, and all they had chosen to become.